All right, guys. So everybody is debating about diversity, equity, and inclusion, which I think is a good thing because diversity, equity, and inclusion has basically been an unchallenged concept ever since the death of George Floyd, in which I would argue that our country officially fell off a cliff after the death of George Floyd. Okay, there were so many negative things that have happened in this country as a result of what happened to George Floyd. Looking back at it, I really wish it didn't happen, okay? Because I think our country would be in a much better place had that not happened. And again, one of the things that have been a negative consequence of that event is the implementation of diversity, equity, and inclusion in institutions across the country, okay? This poisonous ideology that is essentially antithetical to meritocracy, which used to be a basic principle of our society, okay? You get what you earn, okay? We put people in positions of power because they earned it based off merit, okay? And they're going to debate diversity, equity, and inclusion and the consequences of this poisonous ideology on Chris Wallace's show on CNN. Now, this debate is going to be between Reihan Salam, who is the president of the Manhattan Institute. He's a conservative. Jonah Goldberg, who is the founding editor of the National Review Online, Kara Swisher, who is a woke journalist that worked for the New York Magazine, and Lulu Garcia-Navarro, who is a New York Times woke propagandist, right? So again, these are the people on the panel. They're on Chris Wallace's show, and they're going to debate diversity, equity, and inclusion following the ousting of Claudine Gay, Harvard's affirmative action first black woman president. So we're going to react to this debate that goes off the walls because, of course, the woke feminist women on the panel can't stand to hear truth, facts, and logic when it comes to this topic of diversity, equity, and inclusion, which, you know, they happen to benefit from quite a bit. So I want to talk about it, but before we get into it, we have to have a word from the sponsor of this video, Virtual Shield. One of the big four mobile carriers has quietly updated their terms of service to include content that they don't agree with. That means starting now, they will fine users who commit perceived violations using their cell phone bandwidth. These fines can be as high as $500 per violation. And what's worse is that there's no clear understanding in regards to what content will or will not be deemed to be against their rules. This is why I highly recommend and use Virtual Shield. Virtual Shield is a military-grade VPN that allows me to browse the web without the prying eyes of my mobile cell phone carrier, internet service provider, or cyber criminals. My internet data is encrypted in just 2 clicks. Plus, my personal data is even safer with Virtual Shield's online data removal service and built-in ID monitoring service with up to $1 million in identity theft protection insurance. Ensuring my identity is held protected by the best. Try Virtual Shield risk-free for 60 days with no commitment necessary. That includes support for unlimited bandwidth, anonymous browsing, and fast internet speeds across all devices that have Virtual Shield installed. Try it now before signups end by going to virtualshield.com/BCP. Once again, that's virtualshield.com/BCP.
Most people feel like we live in a meritocracy, when in a lot of cases we live in a mirrorocracy. You hire people that are like you, and you see that all over the place. And so people don't quite know where they are, and it's very easy to attack.
Yeah, so one of the things that I hear quite a bit when people want to push back against the idea that society should be a meritocracy is that, well, we don't currently live in a meritocracy is what they say, okay? They say, well, we don't really live in a meritocracy for X, Y, and Z reasons. And some of these reasons are valid. However, that doesn't mean that we should not strive to live in a meritocracy, okay? That is the whole point, right? Like, we should not say, well, because there's some instances where merit is not necessarily considered when it comes to, for example, getting a job. And you're saying, you know what, I'm not going to hire the person who's most qualified. I'm going to hire my friend. I'm going to hire my family member. I'm going to make my son the CEO of the company just because, you know, he's my son, even though he might not necessarily be super competent. I'm going to make him CEO anyways, even though I know they're more qualified individuals. Yes, that happens, right? But that doesn't mean that we should not have meritocracy as a guiding principle for how we generally organize and conduct ourselves in society, especially when it comes to putting people in positions of power, okay? Just because there are some instances where, yes, we don't necessarily have a meritocracy, that doesn't mean that that should not be a guiding principle. Again, we will never be a perfect meritocracy. I don't think that that's actually possible, but we should always have that as a guiding principle for how we go about placing people in important positions of power in our society. And the great thing about capitalism is that capitalism tends to have a way of punishing people who don't have meritocracy as a guiding principle, because what happens is that if you're not putting the most qualified people in place to run a company, to run a business, to run an organization or whatever, right, then that has negative consequences. Less profitability, the company goes out of business, competitors do better, you lose customers. There are negative consequences for it.
Reihan, has, in effect, the country moved on from the so-called racial reckoning we were all talking about after the murder of George Floyd?
I think there is a broad sense that that racial reckoning involved smuggling in certain really contentious ideological ideas that weren't ultimately about diversity, but rather were about imposing ideological uniformity.
Facts. That's exactly what it's about, right? That's like 100% what it's about. Ideological conformity, okay? Because it may seem like on a surface level to the idiot, right, the person that's not paying attention, oh, that we care about a diversity of faces. But they only care about a diversity of faces as far as it is a tool that is used to get as less diversity as possible when it comes to ideas and thinking, okay? They want ideological conformity. The reason why you know this is because even if you are a so-called person of color, but if you don't have the right ideology, all of a sudden, you're not welcome into the club anymore, okay? When they try to tell you that, oh, well, it's about diversity, right? Diversity, equity, inclusion. Everybody should be included. But again, they don't include so-called people of color that don't think correctly, right? If they don't think right, if they're not liberal, they're not woke, you're not invited to the diversity, equity, inclusion party, right? You might as well be white, right? This is what they do. And it's funny because a lot of people don't like the use of the term Democrat plantation, right? But there's a lot of truth behind that term, because if you think about it, you know, back in the day, the slave master, the last thing that they wanted slaves to do is to think. This is why they did not teach slaves how to read and write. Okay, they wanted to make sure that slaves did as little thinking as possible, and they just went along with whatever they were told. Because a diversity of thought, okay, or the ability to think for yourself is a threat to the overall agenda, okay? And this is why I would characterize the modern day woke agenda, right, including diversity, equity, and inclusion, is just another form of mental slavery. That's exactly what it is, especially when it comes to so-called people of color. Because if you are a person of color and you happen to fall out of line, okay, when it comes to the agenda, you get those lashings, right? You get the whippings, okay, that you see happening quite a bit for so-called people of color that, again, don't get on board with the program. Again, it's pretty fascinating stuff to think about.
When you're looking at DEI bureaucracies, what really is noxious about them is that they actually don't respect all sorts of diversity, including viewpoint diversity, including the fact that, look, in some cases, you have groups that are overrepresented, and that can be okay. You know, the point that J.D. Vance was making about the Dallas Mavericks is that it can be good and healthy and reasonable in some domains to have overrepresentation. And that means that underrepresentation can also be.
She said.
Well, you can say it's ridiculous. You can make that assertion, but fundamentally the fact that, you know, I am one second-generation Asian American on a panel of 4. I am massively, massively overrepresented. But I think it's reasonable to say that you're going to judge people based on their merits. And when you're looking at organizations that count that matter, they're high-performance organizations.
Excuse me. This is the burden, and I can't tell you how infuriating I find it. This is the burden that always comes with representation. The idea is that because you are a person of color, suddenly it is you are only there because it is some noblesse oblige. It is because some white guilt put you there because there was some DEI initiative, and you can't win either way you look at it. I mean, what infuriates me is you look at the whole Claudine Gay thing, and everyone's talking about DEI. This woman cannot win or lose either. If she is there,
I'm happy to talk about
let me
Claudine
finish.
Gay,
Let me finish. If she's there it's because of DEI, that they put her there because she's black. If she loses and they kick her out, it's because she actually was never good enough to be there in the beginning, and you can't win in this.
Well, both of those things are true, right? She is in her position because of DEI, okay? Not because she's actually qualified. Again, look at her academic work, okay? Look at her resume, okay? It is a lot less impressive than her predecessors and her colleagues, okay? So she's only there because of DEI, and she lost her job, a job that she shouldn't have had in the first place, okay? So again, these things are true. These things are true. At the end of the day, nobody would really question whether or not a so-called person of color is a diversity hire, or are they there because of white guilt, or, are they qualified if you did not have liberals and woke revolutionaries like these women overtly advocating to put people in positions of power based off race, sex, who they like to sleep with, do they like their genitalia, etc. If you did not make that a prime factor when it comes to putting people in position of powers and qualifications, this is not something that people would ever question. We wouldn't even be having this conversation. But because you've made diversity, equity, and inclusion, okay, aka anti-white racism, a forefront of what you would define as a qualification for a job, now people have to question whether or not the people that you're putting in position of power who are not white and they don't appear to be as qualified as their colleagues or other candidates, people are going to question, hey, are they actually qualified? And then lo and behold, what typically always happens is because they're not qualified, they don't do a good job in their position, aka with this woman right here, the whole plagiarism stuff, right, which kind of revealed that, hey, she really ain't all that qualified, got caught plagiarizing. That basically proves people point that, hey, she shouldn't have had a job in the first place. So again, what's actually ridiculous, okay, is the fact that we are putting people in positions of power that don't have anything to do with merit, okay? And what is infuriating is the fact that these people can't handle the truth, right? That's what infuriates them more than anything. The truth is what infuriates them.
Situation. And it is infuriating as a person of color to constantly have this cudgel put on our head.
A person of color. Again, this woman is probably 100% white Hispanic, right? And loca as well too. Okay. Talking about how she's a woman of color. Again, amazing stuff. Okay. Again, I'm not sure that she would pass as a so-called woman of color if it wasn't for her Spanish. Okay. But I think other than that, in most places, people would say you're white.
The argument you can't win, but you also can't have it both ways. You can't celebrate and tout that someone was hired, and it's a wonderful thing to expand diversity, and Harvard went full tilt talking about how great it was to hire the first black woman, and then say all of a sudden...
The first black person. It wasn't even the first black woman. It was the first black person.
I don't care. The point is that she got caught obviously plagiarizing. And those are the facts that, there's this massive...
This was an ideological, very well-funded...
The motives of the attack don't change the fact that she plagiarized. And where I disagree with you, Kara, is when you say...
When somebody fails who's white and who's a man... Let me finish.
You mean like
when someone who fails... Yes. When someone... Nobody... In fact, there's books written about this. Fail and then come back. Look at Pivot. Exactly. Pivot. Nice way to get in your podcast. Pivot. And then when a person of color fails, all of a sudden it's an indictment of an entire system that the right doesn't
This is so
Well, that's because this person is a representation of the system of the left that has propped her up and put her in this position of power. Now, again, if this is a person of color or a so-called person of color that fails, that wasn't clearly and obviously put in the position because of diversity, equity, and inclusion, okay, then you wouldn't have the same reaction. This woman is literally a figurehead of the diversity, equity, and inclusion movement. She's an embodiment of the movement from the left. That's why people are having this conversation, okay? That's the reason why people are having the conversation.
Ridiculous. She was a graduate of Exeter and Stanford with a PhD from Harvard.
And you know why? You have to be so excellent to get where she was.
Haitian American who came from a family that dominated the concrete industry in Haiti. She was not the wretched of the earth. She was someone who should be judged on her merits.
Wait,
and
I'm
her
sorry,
chief
black people
qualification.
have to be wretched?
No, absolutely not. But she was selected because she established the Office of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging at Harvard. She presided over a steep decline in the free speech climate. And she also targeted minority professors who dissented from her perspective. That was a problem. She was a person with ideas, not someone who belongs to a demographic category.
One thing that strikes a lot of women and people of color a lot, it seems like standards are only applied when it comes to women and people of color. I have seen so many incompetent men on boards of internet companies, and they always talk about, well, we're going to bring on a woman to be more diverse, when they have basically driven a company into a wall.
Do you remember Ruth Simmons, the president of Brown University?
Use the word standards with white men. We just don't.
I don't know where these people are getting this from, right? So apparently when it comes to white men, all of a sudden standards go out the window. As if there hasn't been probably, hundreds of thousands, millions of white men every single year that get denied from positions or jobs because they don't fit the standard, right? Again, isn't it amazing how these people want to go on these long racialized conversations about the white man and how everything is unfair when the argument is simply that, look, we need to hold everybody to the same standards across the board, period, right? That's what the argument is, okay? And for whatever reason, that elicits the reaction of, well, the white man, we don't hold him to standards. Okay, well, fine. We need to hold everybody to the same standards, right? That's what we need to strive for. And we're not going to get there, okay, by essentially lowering the standards for others based off skin color and racial discrimination against whites because you feel like, oh, well, white people have a leg up because they're white, okay? Why don't we focus more on just making sure that everybody is meeting the standards, or everybody has to meet the standards, regardless of their race and skin color, and let's go from there, okay? I think that's the way forward. But again, nobody ever wants to really engage with that, right? They want to boohoo, whine, and cry about the white man all the time, okay? This is what they do. This is what they default to.
And merit and all these other words. And let me just say one other thing.
The president of Brown University celebrated African-American women. No one questioned her credentials, her excellence as a steward of that institution. Are you actually saying that what happened
to Claudine Gay was not a completely engineered? I mean, it was, Chris Rufo said it. He actually admitted to the fact that this was an entirely engineered.
Chris Rufo, we just quickly should explain, a conservative activist who led the charge.
And my colleague who, look, this was not a concerted campaign out of whole cloth. This was based on ideological predilections. Yes. This was based on the fact that she was entrenching certain ideas. She was someone who was actually doing great damage to an important American institution.
In your opinion.
And what he was trying to do was surface the hypocrisy. You know, the idea that we are defending free speech when, in fact, free speech, Harvard literally ranked dead last among research universities in the country on the speech climate.
Women, black people, Latinos, we're always the ones who have to sit here and say, you know what? It's exactly right. When we make a mistake, we have to wear the cloak of shame and say we never deserve to be here to begin with. And I'll say something else. And I just want to say this last thing when we're talking about DEI, which is, you know, there was this big push in 2020 thinking, okay, here we are. We've had a big racial reckoning. And you know what happened? All these DEI offices that were created, 75% of them were led by white men.
Yeah, and they should all be fired, right? They should be fired, okay? These liberal white soy boys that started these DEI offices, yeah, they should be fired, right? So, yeah, I mean, that's my response to that. That's what I believe, okay? And just because they were started by white men, that doesn't mean that they should exist or that it adds credibility to their existence, which, by the way, I found to be fascinating because they want to talk about how, white men are not held to any standards. As if, you know, they're implying that, well, there's a lot of unqualified white men that get jobs just because they're white, but yet they're using these same white men that they're claiming are underqualified a lot of times to be in their positions to add credibility to diversity, equity, and inclusion and the institution that is being built around it. Again, it's pretty fascinating how that works.
In any
And that's
case,
all I have to say
would
about that.
recommend reading Mark Cuban on this because he really is smart. He's talking about building a business that's diverse for the future.
No, he's not. He doesn't believe in diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? Because he believed in diversity, he'd have short Asian women playing on his basketball team, but he doesn't, right? Why doesn't he have short Asian women playing on his basketball team? Well, the reason why is because when it comes to sports, people can instantly recognize that, hey, meritocracy matters. Meritocracy makes sense, okay? And it is dumb to have diversity for the sake of diversity when it comes to attributes that have nothing to do with how well you are at playing the game of basketball. When we're talking about building a NBA roster, right? Or a professional sports roster. Everybody can instantly recognize that. But when it comes to building a business though, okay, all of a sudden that goes out the window. They can't recognize that, oh, well, maybe it doesn't make sense to have diversity for the sake of diversity when it comes to things that really have nothing to do with the qualifications needed to build a business or to, perform in a certain job or role, right? Again, it's amazing how that works. When Mark Cuban has short Asian women on his Dallas Mavericks basketball team making millions of dollars to play basketball, that's when I'll believe him when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Until then, he's just talking, right? It's just virtue signaling.
I got no
And
problem
to do
with
these
diverse
little
businesses.
tweets about
So how do we
climate
get there?
racism is not useful.
You can't fight. Look,
You can
my problem
legislate
with
some things,
DEI
you
is
can't
it's
the other.
illiberal, right? It's speech policing. Claudine Gay got attention because she couldn't figure out how to speak clearly and with moral seriousness
But banning
about
DEI is
anti-Semitism
not illiberal.
while she's talking about DEI, right? She says, well, except for the stuff about Jewish genocide, we believe in all of these other things. That's what got the attention to her, and she would still be there today if she wasn't a plagiarist.
Well,
That's the fact.
I am glad we settled that.
Yeah, I don't know about that. I definitely think that they were going to oust her regardless. I think the plagiarism thing was like the icing on the cake, right? If it wasn't a plagiarism, they'd find something else. But just the plagiarism being there, again, really just confirms what everybody was saying, which is that, wait, she's underqualified. She shouldn't have had a job in the first place. And, it is what it is. I just find it so fascinating how these woke ideologues want to go out of their way to defend something that clearly and overtly is anti-meritocratic and also racist at the same time. But hey, let me know what you guys think. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Most importantly, share a Black conservative perspective. Peace.